The Poet Speaks podcast is sponsored by the Poetry Lab. Poetry Lab partners attend a monthly workshop led by a teaching artist who represents a fresh new voice in the writing world. The goal, now more than ever, is to hold space for poets to write, read, and craft their learning journeys in a supportive community. And it's only $35 a month. Sign up at thepoetrylab.com/lab partners. All right, everyone, welcome back to the Poet Speaks podcast. Today, we have a very, very, very special guest. Our next guest is a poet and performer whose work grasps for moments of tenderness and persistent joy at the intersection of blackness and womanhood. She's the author of 3 award-winning collections of poetry, Down to Earth, Abscess, and This Is How We Disappear, and has released 2 spoken word albums, Mother Tongue and Swim. She has written 3 plays, The Sixth, an intergenerational exploration of womanhood, Naked, a one-woman play, and 8 out of the country, a musical. She has scripted advertising campaigns for global brands and was an actor on the hit television series Giddy Up, which aired across Africa. She is the 9th Poet Laureate of the City of Edmonton. Please welcome to the podcast, Titilope Sonuga. Titilope, how are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you so much for asking. So tell us a little bit about where are you currently right now? I know a lot of your work is based in Nigeria, but are you living there currently right now?
Uh, in this moment, I am in Edmonton, Alberta, Treaty 6 territory. Um, I move between Lagos and here. Both are my homes, and but in this season, I've been here in Edmonton, where I'm serving as the Poet Laureate at the moment. So yes, the answer is I'm in Edmonton, but I'm all over the place at any given time.
Yes, yes. So she is globalized. So tell us a little bit about introduce to us where you grew up and where you started from. From my knowledge, you
Sure.
grew up in Nigeria, but you moved to Canada at
Yeah,
around
as a teenager.
preteens, as a teenager.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Lagos, Nigeria.
Mhm.
Um, and my family moved here to Edmonton when I was 13 years old.
Mm.
Um, and I lived here for 10 years before I ever went back to Nigeria again at 23. And once I did, um, I just knew I couldn't be away that long ever again. So I think from around the age of 23, I tried to make it a point to go back home once a year, even though I was still living here. Um, yeah, and yeah, so that's where I grew up. Did you ask where I got my start? Was that the follow-up question?
Yeah, sure. Tell us, where'd you get the start for that spoken word poetry?
Um, yeah, so I have always written. I think as a young child, my mom gave me a notebook whenever she went out of town and just asked me to just write down whatever I thought or felt or the things that my sisters were doing to harass me. I have 3 older sisters. So that's my sort of like first introduction to storytelling and just like information gathering and world building and exaggerating a little bit. Um, but my family immigrated to Canada when I was a teenager, and like the weight of immigrant childhood is that you are always acutely aware of the fact that like a really big sacrifice was made for you to be in the place that you are.
Yeah.
And so for me, like it didn't really feel like an option to pursue the arts,
Mm.
especially because then like the arts, we didn't have a lot of models for people who were doing it and doing it um, in a way that seemed viable, unless you were like a supernova, like unless you were like a big star. There weren't really models for people who were just earning a like decent living
Yeah.
and doing the arts. And so I didn't have anyone to reference, and I was just too afraid to do it. So I started a career in engineering. My father was a civil engineer, and I followed in his footsteps. And
Wow.
so I studied that in school and then started working in the city of Edmonton, building roads and bridges, and just like grateful to have a really good job. But I was still doing poetry on the side. So I was, performing at open mics. I'd started my own weekly open mic called Rouge Poetry with a group of friends called the Breath and Poetry Collective. And we just kind of championed spoken word, slam poetry, and performance in the city. It wasn't particularly popular at the time, but I think we started a bit of a movement. And so I knew that I loved this thing and I had this other life that I was living, but engineering was definitely like my bread and butter. Engineering funded my first album, my first collection. Like I really, it paid for most of the things that the collective had to do, you know, like, um, but I wasn't fulfilled, which sounds very privileged and maybe a little frivolous to say, but I just felt like that there was this other thing that I was so deeply in love with, and every time I was doing it, I felt so happy and excited. And so I just started to think around like, how can I make this my life full time?
Yeah.
Um,
I'm curious for you as a, because you had mentioned like being the child of like so Nigerian immigrants, right? I know
yes.
for a lot of Nigerian first, second generation children,
Hmm.
the like you said, there's a we didn't I take from a lot of it from my experience as well. There's a lot of pressure to kind of remain in one of these fields
Hmm.
that is a guarantee. So like engineering, doctor, lawyer, those are typically the fields that they kind of want you to strive into. For you, how much do you think of like having that immigrant background has affected maybe in terms of like your work? Did you find yourself doing, like you said, even though engineering funded a lot of your art, did you find yourself living a bit of a double life? Because maybe did you feel your parents would not have fully accepted if you 100% were like, no, I'm just doing art, period, point blank, nothing else?
Yeah, I mean, in full transparency, there's a way that having an engineering degree validated everything else I was trying to do, right?
Right.
So at least my parents could say she has an engineering degree. And if people asked them, they would say, ah, she's just, you know, she's just doing the arts. Yeah, she will go back. And, you know, there was something that they could hold on to. So that definitely was very valuable. Um, and I, yes, I was living a double life in that my sisters would come out to my shows, but I hadn't really asked my parents to come see me
Yeah.
until much later on. And when I was kind of like a little bit more sure that I wasn't like that it was good, that people actually liked it, and I wasn't just
Yeah.
fooling myself. But definitely, I think there is a privilege to having something that feels like security. And so whenever people ask me even now about like, oh, should I, you know, quit my degree and go into the arts full time, I always say to them, like, there's no shame in finishing what you started. There's no shame in getting a degree in something that you feel good about. And the arts is not running away. You can do both. You can do several things. You can live many lives in one lifetime. So
Right.
yeah, I think it bought me a lot of grace with my parents, and for a long time too, whenever I would meet people, being able to say, oh, I'm an engineer, or I, you know, was it made them take me a bit more seriously. Unfortunately, that's just the reality of the world that I was in at the time.
Yeah, it's definitely like that double-edged sword. It's like yeah, it's a double-edged sword. The arts I still think to this day don't get the full respect that they deserve
Mm,
unless you reach that capitalism, that capitalistic type of like like you said, supernova, superstardom. It's like people don't give you the respect that you duly deserve.
yeah.
So talk about a little bit about, so you talked about you came into spoken word, like it seemed like just from childhood, you know, your mom gave you a notebook. How did that kind of transgress? Like you talked a little bit, you touched on it slightly, how you kind of did that collective, and then kind of tell us, how did you now kind of ascent to the big stage that you're on now?
Um, you know, at the level of my mom giving me a book, I didn't know what I was doing. I was just writing. I would say that the first time that I wrote poetry that I thought this is poetry was in grade 10. I had an English teacher who took an interest in my work and just thought, oh, this is, you know, made a little bit of a big deal out of something that I had written. And
Yeah.
that was the first seed that was like, okay, like there's something, this is a poem. Like this is a real poem. And so I just started writing in that way. I hadn't really shared it publicly at that time, but I would share with my friends and things like that. I would say it was in university that I started to explore performance. And that's because I went to the University of Alberta here in Edmonton, and like the U of A had a really great community of African students
Mm,
from all over. And we kind of just gravitated towards each other. Of course, the Nigerians found themselves, but also like people from all over the continent were on campus and studying all sorts of things. But we had what we called at the time, formerly known as the Black Students Association, that then became SASH, which is Students of African, Caribbean, Canadian Heritage or something. And so we'd have these like talent shows and fashion shows, you know, the typical like university campus ways that we like energize ourselves while we're trying to get these degrees. And it was on one of such stages that I, you know, shared a poem for the first time and started to just build a little bit of like slow momentum. Then at that time I would post on Facebook and people would say, "Oh, nice job," you know, give you the likes. And that was like when Facebook was emerging. And then I just found local open mics in the city, places where I could read my poems. Our scene at the time here in Edmonton was still quite like traditional. It was like a lot of page poetry. And so um, it didn't matter to me. It was just like, it was a stage that I could go share. And I knew that I loved performance because I had gone down this like deaf poetry jam rabbit hole and I loved what I saw. And I thought, oh, that's the thing I want to do. So I just go into these spaces and share my poems, and one gig leads to the next thing, and people start inviting you to things. The collective was really the pathway for me. Once that collective started and people started attending, like the room would be packed every Tuesday night. We started off very slowly, obviously. Convincing people to come out to watch poetry on a Tuesday evening is hard. But once we started to build this reputation, and Slam was really instrumental in that, there were Tuesdays where we couldn't, like, we had to turn people back at the door. It was packed. And so it was great for the community, but also great for me in that being the person who spearheaded this project also put me at the forefront of it, and people started inviting me to teach workshops and perform across the city. So I mean, it's been slow incremental growth. It's just like one thing into the next thing. Then you release a little book, then maybe you do an album, you do one gig, you do another gig, and a person who knows a person who knows a person. And that's all it's been. It's just like slow climbing, and just trying to consistently improve upon the work at every stage.
At every stage, for sure. No, I can appreciate that. Yeah, it definitely, so for you, definitely you would say it's more of a like an oven that slowly heats up, not a microwave that's instant, right?
Yeah, absolutely not instant.
I think from a lot of, especially looking at, for people that may look at your career, they may look at it like that instant cup of like hot noodles, because you wrote the acclaimed play Ada the Country. It's pronounced Ada, correct?
Yeah, Ada.
Based around Nigerian women culture, amongst other things. For you, what has that, so the play, it's done so exponentially well. For you, writing a play, being a poet, writing a play, what does that meant for you, bringing, you know, that Nigerian culture, Nigerian woman to the forefront in terms of just the acclaim that you've gotten due to that that play that you wrote? What does that meant for you to really see like your work about like something you're passionate, Nigerian woman, bringing that to the whole mainstream and having such like big praise and acclaim for it? What does that meant for you?
It's meant a whole lot. Like, I think at some point while my career was kind of building up in North America, I knew that I needed to go back home. And so after I left my engineering job, I moved back to Nigeria and started like kind of working the open mic circuits there and building in the same way that I had done here. It was important for me to be seen at home, to be valued at home, because like it's home. So the journey from there to writing this play really has been just um, like, once this was my job, I knew that the work that I created had to be expansive. I knew that I couldn't just do slam. I knew that I couldn't just do like, here's an invitation, come to a microphone, do one poem and leave. So I started to explore like all the different avenues, like places where poetry could exist. So I even acted on a television series. It was just like, and in doing the series, they were like, how about you do a poem as the character? So just finding ways to inject this poetry into all the other places. And it was a natural progression of that that led to Ada, Lala Akindoju, who's like a really incredible actress, producer, casting director. She does all of these things, and a true like thespian who is really big in the theater space in Nigeria. Had this commission to do this play, and brought me on board and said, hey, like, why don't you try writing a play? I'd never written anything like a
Yeah.
play at that point. So it was a huge gamble, a risk that she took, but she was like, I think you can do it. I think we
Word,
can
yeah.
make this thing happen. And so I just like got down into the work and just prayed. And I think the combination of the words on the page plus her expertise and experience in the space, she was
Yeah.
able to like translate the work for the stage in a way that really brought it to life.
Yeah.
And so I remember the first time being in the room and like watching the audience watch my words. I was sinking lower and lower into the chair because I was just like, you know, your heart's pounding. It's the first time people are watching it. But every time somebody laughed or like I could hear the whole room like agreeing,
Yeah.
I started to build confidence. And yeah, so it's done its second run now, just very recently,
Wow.
and was is quite well loved. And I just feel really proud. I guess to answer the question, I feel really proud to have done that work and to have done it with a team of people who like everyone's firing on all cylinders, right? So there's the writer and there's the producer and there's, you know, the even like right down into the volunteers, like everybody who
Yeah,
is
man.
there is doing, there's the marketing, which is like such a huge component of this project. People know about it because like the marketing is so on point, like it's all over the
Excellent.
place. And
Oh,
so I just feel really grateful to be a part of that team and the work that they've done. And I'm hopeful that I can do more work like that in the future.
absolutely. I think for a lot of people to hear that, to know that doing spoken word a poet, now doing writing plays. I think for so many people, for people to hear that, it probably takes them aback because they probably are just like, what? Poetry? You write plays now? We write movies? I think because so many people have such a niche view. So I think it's so great for people to hear coming from you that, straight up, you can go into so many routes. Like you said, when you started your career, you were going to expand it as large as possible. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
I think a lot of poets would, or people even just starting out would love to hear that because it's such an umbrella, poetry, being a poet,
Mhm.
so many things that you can go into. And going into that, you have worked with a million, so many different brands like Google, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Intel, just naming a few. For you, what is it meant to be a poet in these spaces and working with these types of brands now as like your influence keeps rising? What's it mean for a poet working with a brand like Bill and Melinda Gates or like Intel? What has that been for you?
It just feels like a wave of like just grace and privilege, honestly. I think,
Wow, yeah.
again, in tying into this idea of doing work that feels expansive,
Hmm.
um, for me, it's just been a journey in being able to say yes when it matters. So being invited to do something, and rather than saying, oh, I don't do that, you know, whatever, being able to say, okay, yeah, sure. And most of the times I say yes before I even know how I'm going to make this thing happen. um, but thankfully, I've been able to manage, you know, and yeah, so that feels like another tool in the toolbox to be
Mm,
able to tell stories that brands are trying to tell. And if you watch like an advert or like listen for the words, all of that is poetry. You
yeah.
know, like this
Mm,
ability to tell the story of something that people might want to be a part of is
mm,
poetry. And so who better to tell that story than a poet? And so when the work came, of course it's intimidating. These brands are big brands and you want to do a good job. um, and I think it's just been like practice and sometimes working with like, so some a brand like Google I've worked with several times, or brands like GT Bank, Guaranteed Trust Bank, which is a big bank in Nigeria. I've worked with several times as well. And once you are in the work with those brands, you start to understand their tone and language and voice. And so you're able to
yeah.
deliver. It's not like a magical wand that I wave. It's just like being able to practice that work and trust that I can do it.
Yeah.
Even when there's no evidence to the fact that I can, it's just kind of trusting that like I can make this happen. And I
Yeah.
feel really, yeah, like really privileged to have been able to do that kind of work. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, it's beyond amazing. I'm curious. I think so many people, I know myself, how does a spoken word poet even get in contact with Google to do work? Like how does that even, because I've talked to people even in South Africa on this show, and they're working with Nike, Adidas, all these things. For you, how do you as a spoken word poet even get in contact with these brands to even do tell your poetry?
I mean, there are many different ways, but I will say for me, there's so, and this is why I think moving back to Nigeria and the time that I did was so pivotal.
Wow.
Um, Edmonton, Alberta is a beautiful city. Lagos, Nigeria is a city that has like a real pulse. Like things are happening. And by that I mean global brands are on the continent. And if they're on the continent, then they're in Lagos because Lagos is like a beating heart. And so it is much easier than it would be here, for example, to go out to an evening of something else and meet um, the CMO of a brand just in casual conversation, right? So with the Intel gig, I was actually a brand ambassador for Intel for a project called She Will Connect, which was a project where they were trying to get more women and girls into STEM fields, to be online more, to recognize that like engineering and science was not just for boys in the ways that our culture sometimes has taught. And so I had already been doing my work and performing in the city, which is how I met Adim Isiakwana, who worked with Google at the time, and he just had like just a flash of genius really, and said, "Hey, you used to be an engineer," and I said, "Yeah," and it was like, "And you're a poet now?" "Yeah," and it's like, "Okay, you are an engineer, so you like are somebody who's in a STEM field or has been, and you're a poet, so you can tell the story that we're trying to tell as a brand." So it was just this like confluence of all the things that I have done. And he was like, "I think this brand ambassadorship would be perfect for you because when we go out to meet these girls, you can tell them like I'm an engineer, but also tell them in a way that connects, um, and in a way that's poetic and that feels moving and inspirational, etc." And so Adim really took a chance on me, is really what happened. He was just like, let's just try and see what happens. And then the thing is, once that happened, it builds up to the invitation for the next thing, right? So over and beyond meeting a person who works for a brand who sees your potential, I would say to poets who are like trying to make these connections is um, to ready yourself, right? So where can brands get a hold of you? Do you have a website or an email or something that's really visible, such that if I did the work with Google and somebody from some other organization wanted to know about me, they should be like within a couple of steps, be able to find me, be able to send me an email or call me or whatever it is to say, "Hey, I saw the work that you did with this other brand. We're doing this other completely different thing, but can you build something for us?" And that's all it was. Like it wasn't, I'm not so deeply connected. It was just one job leading into the next job. And they were able to lead into each other because I was available. I'm online, like you can find me. And I know that there are lots of gifted artists who are gifted, but difficult to track down. And so I would say that is like the biggest barrier. So difficult to track down as far as being in contact with you, but also showcasing your work, like post, like let's know that you've done work that looks like this before. It opens you up for more invitations to do that. So I would say, yeah, be out there.
Yeah.
Really, really out there.
Yeah, you hit on such a key point, like a pivotal point, that marketing really is like key in terms of, like you said, you have some poets and artists in general, they are difficult to find. And I think some people maybe like that question mark, that mystique surrounding their art, but in the same breath, there is there's just definitely advantages to being out there, being online, having a presence virtually and in person. So yeah, no, I think that's great, dropping some great gems there. So let's move into, you were the first poet in 2015 to appear at a Nigerian presidential inauguration. That is huge. Tell us how did that come about? How did you, I mean, what was that like, performing a poem at a presidential inauguration? Were you nervous? Were you sweating? What was that even like?
Yeah, I was definitely sweating. Yeah, I mean, I was actually here in Alberta. I was in Calgary, and I got a call um, about the fact that this inauguration was happening, and they were considering me to perform. I cannot, for the life of me, tell you what led to the conversations that led to that call. But I really just think, again, it's that thing of like, and I often say that most of the best things that have happened for me have happened because somebody dared to mention my name in rooms that I was not in.
Yeah.
I was
Wow.
no, I was not there. I don't know. But somebody thought, oh, this girl, what do you think? And that opened up the conversation for the invitation, is what I would imagine, right? So I get a call basically saying, like, this thing is coming up. Can you write something? Can you be in Nigeria? To which I said, absolutely. It was a particularly powerful time in the country. I don't know if you remember the 2015 um, elections. It was like the country felt really hopeful in that time,
Yeah.
and people really came out to vote in massive numbers, right? So it felt like a really good time to be able to write something that felt like it held the energy of all of that. I wanted to write a poem for the people. And I know that like some artists are a little like kind of skittish around political affiliations, but
Yeah.
I saw that invitation as not an invitation for a political party or even the president, but
Mm.
as an invitation to speak to the country, and to speak to people just like everyday people like me. So it wasn't really about that. It didn't matter. Um, they didn't matter to me as much as like the everyday person who was watching me. So yes, of course, I was like scared and terrified and nervous, but I also felt like I could rise to the occasion, and I all I could do was the best I could do. I spent time writing this poem. It was a poem I was quite proud of, and so when the time came, I just like I tried to use all of the practice that I had had. Again, this thing of like um, getting ready so or staying ready so you don't have to get ready. It was like I had been
Yeah.
performing at this point for years. And so that bit I knew, I just had to manage my nerves. And so I did the best I could. It to me, it's still an honor to have done that. Of
Yeah.
course, the state of the country is quite different now, and people are quite disenfranchised and in a lot of pain. And so sometimes I look back at that time with a mixture of gratitude and sadness, just because I know how hopeful a lot of people were for this change that was coming, and they felt or feel quite let down. But I still consider it an honor to have been invited and to have been able to do that in my lifetime, you know.
Yeah, I mean, no, what an absolute honor for sure. You should be very proud. I'm sure that that poem definitely influenced a lot of people in a positive direction, even though things now are looking a bit more disenfranchised. I'm sure people still remember that piece that you performed. For you, I'm so curious, what inspirations do you draw from for your writing, for your poetry? What's the biggest inspiration you would say that you have that inspires your writing?
Um, it's a little random. Like I think what I've been able try to do is combine this idea of like random moments of inspiration or like a feeling that moves through you and just practice, right? Because this became my work and my life. I couldn't really wait for inspiration a lot of the time, especially when like a brand comes calling or they call you to come do an inauguration.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
can't be like, oh, can you move the inauguration until I'm inspired and ready?
yeah.
So what I've been able to do is like find inspiration but also just be in the practice of just doing it even when I'm not feeling inspired. But I would say that at the core of the work that I write, I try to ground it in love, in our running toward love or running away from love. This idea that we're having a universal human experience, and all of our pain and suffering, all of our joy and happiness is rooted in this idea of our search for love and a place of belonging. So I am eternally inspired by that sentiment.
Yeah, well, it's a very interesting thing that keeps you motivated is just the sense of belonging because originally, because when we first started this interview, your kind of uh guidance into poetry has been your sense of belonging going back to your home. So it's a lot of where you're from is really this idea of home, really for you, is what guides you in terms of what motivates you for your writing. So I think that's a very beautiful thing. Um, so going back to your work, outside of poetry, you also act. I find this also, you're a Renaissance woman at this point. You act, poetry, engineer. What can you not do? So talk about your work with acting. And I'm pronouncing the show Giddy Up. Is that the name of the show?
Yeah, Giddy Up. Yeah.
Giddy Up on that. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about your
You
work in
should watch it.
acting.
It's on YouTube. It's out there for you to see. You should go see. Um, I like to say that I acted because I think the work that actors do is really important and really like brilliant. I
Mhm.
had a chance opportunity to act on a television series. I happened to be in Nigeria at the time at an event where I met the
Yeah.
writer and producer of the show, and she said, "Oh, you look like a character that I've written. Would
Wow.
you come and audition?"
Yeah.
And I had never acted before. I mean, I'd done like some little high school theater productions or things like that, but I was just like, okay, I mean, I'm just gonna try and see what happens. I just thought it'd be a funny story that I could tell. And I went to the audition and got the part of Eki on the show Giddy Up, which is about um, four friends in the city of Lagos who are trying to make it. Each of them, one of them is a fashion designer. I was a photographer, an artist, another who's just like a hustler, and the fourth who's like a tech bro. He was trying to get a tech startup off the ground. And it's just about our conflicts in love and life and all that kind of stuff. And I got the role, and then I realized I actually had to act in this thing. And
Yeah. Yes, you gotta act.
exactly, I actually have to do it. But I was surrounded by people who really knew what they were doing and made sure that I didn't embarrass myself too much.
Yeah.
Um, and the beauty of that was that role allowed people an introduction to me as a poet. And so it
Yeah.
really, I would say in acting in Giddy Up is really what built my following. And that opened me up to another world. So
Yeah.
the acting gig was one of the first things I did after moving back to Lagos. So Intel, all of that stuff came after. So I owe a depth of gratitude to Jade Solau Shiberu, who's like the writer and director of Giddy Up, who casted me on that role. Her and alongside Lala Akindoju, who's also on Out of Country. So as you can see, like these like
Yeah.
connections build on top of each other. So uh yeah, I'd say like nothing is for nothing, right? So people
Yeah.
you meet
True.
in a coffee shop, at an event, you never know what that's going to turn into in the future. So grateful to them both and to that work.
Yeah, it's crazy how like I said this before on this podcast, like when you're going on your journey, you can't connect the dots. It's only when you look back can you connect those
Mm-hmm.
dots, because like you
Mm-hmm.
said, the same person was in Out of Country, it was in Giddy Up, doing so it's like all these things are interconnecting for you and like your career path. Like it's really crazy when you look back on those things and realize so
Yeah.
much of it has been, like you said, nothing is for nothing. So it's literally so much of what you're doing, you don't even know you're planting seeds for the future,
Yeah,
even if,
absolutely.
even if it looks minuscule at the time. So I think that is crazy. That is amazing. Congratulations for that
Thank you.
amazing piece of work. Are you going to be acting anytime soon again?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I'm open to it. I think it's something like I really loved doing it. I don't think I'm very, very good at it. But I also just don't think I haven't had enough practice, right? So if I were to act, I would love to be able to just practice a little bit more and get some more opportunities to um, build that muscle. But I'm open to it. I'm not closed to it at all.
No, that's what's up. So this has been such a great interview. As we're wrapping up, I am I'm curious, for you, what do you think people can truly take away from spoken word poetry?
Um, I'd expand that to say what they can take away from poetry in general and the arts. Um, what we do is a reflection of the times. It is a reflection of the human experience. I think that artists are really the last truth tellers of our time, right? So what you can take away from the arts, from spoken word, from poetry in particular, art forms that have had to push against a norm, and push beyond the ways that things were done, is this idea that as human beings, we have a wealth of potential, and that even though the world is on fire most of the time, there's still just a little sliver of hope left, a little bit of light left to move forward with. Um, Artists remind us that we are not alone, that we're all part of this great human experience, and we document what it was like to be here.
I like that a lot. I like that a lot. We document why it's what it is to be here. So my last question for you, why do you need to get your words out?
I need to get my words out because I would probably explode, because the call and response of saying something out loud and having it affirmed by people saying, yes, me too, reminds me that I'm not alone, that I'm part of something bigger. I have to get my words out as a way to reaffirm that, to remind myself of the fact that other people have walked this path before and will walk it after.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you. That is such a beautiful answer. Other people will walk this path before, other people will walk this path after. I think that's a beautiful, beautiful sentiment. And on that note, oh my goodness, thank you for this amazing interview. We're so happy to have you on the show. Before we wrap up, tell us, what is 2022 looking like for your writing and beyond, and where can folks find all of your amazing work at, social media handles, all that good stuff?
Okay, I'll try to remember it all. 2022 and beyond is just me trying to create work. I just came back from a writing residency where I wrote draft 0 of what could be a novel. So continuing to just kind of work on that for who knows how long to come. My next album is percolating, and a next collection as well. And you can find me, I'm online, I'm everywhere. My website, www.titilope.ca, and Titilope is spelled TITILOPE.ca. On Instagram, I'm at Titilope. On Twitter, I'm at Dear Titilope. But if you just Google Titilope Sonuga, Sonuga, you will, all of those things should bubble up to the top, and you can find and follow me on all those platforms.
Perfect. All right, everyone. So Titilope, all of her info will be in the YouTube description box of this video. Check out our YouTube page to get all of her links. Titilope, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for your generous and thoughtful questions.
Absolutely. So everyone, please go check out all of her amazing work. Everyone, this is the Poet Speaks podcast. We will talk to you soon. Goodbye, everyone.